This Dr. Kangarlu I met through a friend of mine, Michelle Evans, who was head of HR at Meta for quite a while. And he is amazing. What he does is he does this, we'll have to ask him in more detail, but very special brain scan, not your usual. Then he finds places where things don't look right. I'm telling you the, gross way. Then he goes in and sends waves in to like startle those places. And then they get connected. And he says he's cured depression, a whole bunch of stuff without meds.
I have one question though. Did the president get this treatment before the State of the Union address? Will he sound like Obama after this treatment?
You know what somebody said to me, is a brilliant Comcast client, said, what are they worried about the balloon when TikTok is reporting everything to the Chinese government anyway?
Right.
I thought
I
that
know.
was smart.
Well, TikTok will tell you everything is sitting in the U.S. in Oracle's cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
Mhm.
believe that.
Mhm.
But then again, how much can you trust Oracle? How much
I
can you
don't
trust
trust
big business in
anybody.
general?
I mean, it's come to the point where you feel so rocky, so unsafe. But like,
Nothing. Yeah. I don't
even
know
though
if you
they
saw
say
last
they're
week.
getting the balloon, don't you think they have the balloon?
Yes.
Yes, me too. I think they have the balloon.
Yes.
And I think right
They
now
have
they're
Navy
looking at it.
SEALs. They have Navy SEAls diving underwater to pick up every single bit of balloon salvage.
Yeah, even the string on the balloon. Everything.
Yeah, I was just going to say the way you see balloons like up on a tree after a kid's birthday
Yeah.
party, it's not like that.
Oh, it's not? Okay. But that's
No.
very bad for the birds, those balloons.
I know.
Yeah, very bad. We don't have balloons anymore. All right,
How do you celebrate?
I don't know. Should we let him in?
Yeah, we're really thrilled to be jolting, literally and figuratively, because what he does is deliver pulsed
That's
jolts
right.
to the brain with someone who is really defining the future of mental health and well-being from the inside of our brains out.
Yep. So let's let him in. So this is Adam Hanft.
Hello.
My partner on Jolty, my partner in
doctor?
crime, a very old friend of mine who's brilliant. And then me, you met me already. And
Yes.
we were just trying to introduce you, but we couldn't because you have to introduce yourself.
My name is Alayar Kangarlu. I'm a physicist with the concentration of my work is on MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and specifically techniques for seeing the brain and its functions better with MRI. And obviously, with the application in psychiatry and neuroscience, and how taking image of the structure of the brain and the function of the brain can help us better understand how human brain organizes itself and organizes information. And that's the kind of information that is being used for better understanding psychiatric diseases and bringing more advanced therapeutic techniques to psychiatry.
So I was just going to ask you to explain in a little more layperson's language for the benefit of our listeners. So what you do is you put somebody under a fMRI, full magnetic resonance imaging. You look at what's happening in the brain. You understand where there are shortcomings, gaps, problems cognitively or behaviorally, and then you send pulse waves using TMS to restore some level of functioning. Is that sort of it?
That's
close.
Pretty good. Yes. So MRI is, medicine uses imaging in general. Basically, the Department of Radiology in every hospital or every clinic, this is the department that uses different imaging techniques. CT, X-ray, ultrasound, PET, SPECT, and MRI, of course, right? I mean, in my opinion, MRI is the most powerful imaging technique, medical imaging technique. And it's because of the fact that it has very high sensitivity for what we call soft tissue. like, everything other than bone, right? Soft tissue. And, in the brain, in the human brain, the most critical part of the human brain, the gray matter, the white matter, the cerebrospinal fluid, these are all very soft tissue. And MRI can provide an amazingly exact and sensitive and accurate um, depiction of the structure of the gray matter and white matter. And because of the fact that the structural integrity of gray matter and white matter is very important in the health of the brain, um, being able to accurately image it. For the time being, I'm just talking about the structure of the brain. We haven't even gotten into the function of the brain. Is extremely important. So this is why when MRI came into medicine, our ability to diagnose various pathologies for the entire body. I'm concentrated on brain because of my interest, but the same thing is true for the rest of the body, for abdomen, for musculoskeleton, and so on. It really just gave us a quantum leap in ability to see inside the body and inside the brain. And if you think about the brain diseases, you can really differentiate between the diseases of the brain and the diseases of the mind. So neurology is an expertise that deals with the diseases of the brain, and psychiatry deals with the diseases of the mind. And but I was telling you that radiology really gives service to every department in a typical hospital except psychiatry. Psychiatry hasn't been able to take full advantage of imaging techniques, various imaging techniques, specifically MRI, because of the fact that psychiatry deals with the diseases of the mind. And in order to take advantage of an imaging technique, you need to be able to take a picture of the thing you are trying to treat, right? And up until probably 10 years ago, we couldn't take a picture of the mind. Now we can. And here I'm using the word mind as synonymous with brain activity. So your brain activity really represents your mind. Our brain has many different regions that are specializing in very specific actions or very specific tasks. And in order to really connect to the outside world, to the reality, you need to get different brain regions to work together, right? And if we can find out exactly what part of the brain is synchronized with which other part, then we develop an ability of building a network, different brain regions that need to work together to connect us to reality of the outside world, right? I mean, it's very similar to, our ability to monitor internet in a country or across the globe, or monitor flight patterns, all over the world, or look at the, activities of, let's say, super tankers who are, flowing on oceans around the world, taking commodities and goods and services from one part of the world to another part of the world. And all these services can really tell us exactly what's happening. If you have, for instance, if you look at the flight patterns in a country, you would be able to get a measure of the availability of that service. The same thing is true about the human brain. If we can look at different brain regions and look at the activity of one region and basically looking at the activity of the entire brain, then we would be able to accurately connect different brain regions that are working together like hand and glove. If we can measure the exact activity, let's say oscillation of a signal we receive from one part of the brain, and compare that with basically the rest of the brain, we would be able to find the partners for one region. And we might be able to find out that this region that I'm concentrating on might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different counterparts.
Yeah. Just let me ask you something, though. You say it's good for depression, it's good for drug abuse, it's good for PTSD, Alzheimer's. I mean, it sounds like a miracle. How does it do all those things?
Well, so we are here, to be accurate, we are talking about 2 different techniques. For the time being,
Okay.
so far, I've been talking about MRI and fMRI and
Yeah, no, I
ability.
know.
And then, so once we can find out exactly how different brain regions work, then think about a possibility of doing the same thing on a large number of people with no history of neuropsychiatric disorders. Then we can come up with a model of how different brain regions should work together. We call it a functional map of the brain, right? So if you have a standard model of how different brain regions should be working together or working against each other, then once we have that model, then we can do the same thing on people with history of psychiatric disorder and compare it with this standard model and know exactly in the brain of the patient what part is not doing its job,
Yeah.
right?
Well, but I met this young woman, maybe she was 19, that flew all the way from California to be with you. And I mean, your waiting room is full of people that you are helping without knowing exactly how, finishing the work of the understanding exactly how the brain works. And she swore to me, she didn't know who I was or that I knew you, that you cured her depression that she's had forever. So
Yes.
how are you doing that?
Right. So remember, I told you that the clinic uh, is specialized in imaging. I collaborate with them. I do research with the
Mm-hmm.
imaging part of it, and I work on making sure that the imaging is very accurate and very precise, and all those functional maps are uh, uh, really depict the true functioning of the brain and all of that. But what they do, what the clinic takes that image and then they do analysis on the image and find, and like I told you, they compare it with standard brain, and then they find out exactly what part of the brain of that young woman is not doing its job. Is it too slow or too fast? And those regions are identified, and then the information is sent to a computer that when that young woman goes to the clinic, the clinic, she sits on a chair very similar to a dentist chair, and all the information about the targets, what they call targets, which are really those areas that have been identified as not doing their jobs. Either they're working too fast or they're working too slow, and then they have a way of directing some magnetic pulses, some devices that create magnetic pulses. They can direct them exactly to the sides that are too slow and speed them up, or to the sides that are too fast and slow them
Okay,
down.
excuse me. What are you directing? A what?
Magnetic
The
a
magnetic.
device the size of the palm of my hand that
Yeah.
goes to the brain, and the
Okay.
computer guides you to the exact site of the target, and
Yeah.
then it sends some pulses for 2 minutes here and 3 minutes there, and all the different.
And do they come
Basically,
out of your office like skipping or takes a how many times do you have to do this?
they no, it's the technology. I mean, I don't want to really draw an exact analogy, but it's very
No.
similar to the way that they tune up a car. Your car has a lot of moving parts. After you drive your car for 6 or 7 months, the part that are supposed to be working exactly together, they fall slightly out of pace. When you take it to the mechanic,
Yeah.
they fine tune all the parts that have to be synchronized, and then your car gains more power, and the gas consumption goes down and all of that. So it's the same. It's basically they use the same idea as the tuning of the brain. I mean, we didn't have this capability before because we didn't know
Right.
how to measure the activity of different brain regions, and now we do. And this technique probably is going to gain popularity and
And aren't
become.
the pharmaceutical companies going to hate you because nobody's going to need those pills anymore?
Well, it will take a long time before this technique becomes the dominant, it becomes the mainstream treatment for psychiatry, because of the fact that the same thing is true with all new technologies. I remember I had my first cell phone in 1995,
Right.
26 years ago, and it took a long time before everybody in the country has a cell phone. So it takes a long time, and the fact that it's a very sophisticated technology. It requires a lot of mathematics, a lot of physics, a lot of computational work, and all of that. And that's the reason why their clinic, I mean, Neurotherapeutix, is probably, to my knowledge, it's the only clinic in America, that certainly the only clinic in New York that offers this technology, because it's very technology demanding, computationally demanding. It requires physicists, neuroscientists, psychologists, computer
Yeah.
programmers, and so because of that, it will take a while before
Okay, so they can relax for a minute.
Can I
before the
ask,
Annie, you
pharmaceuticals start hating them.
can I just ask a quick question, which is,
yeah.
so you have whatever is a normal brain is the correlative, right? And then you
Yes.
compare that to somebody who's suffering from untreatable or serious clinical depression. And then you find the regions and you do your magic. Is it settled science that those regions are in effect what are driving the clinical depression, or is that part of your thesis which is still being studied?
Well, there's been a lot of imaging studies of different psychiatric disorders and the various imaging techniques. And, MRI is not the only technique. There is, as I told you, there is PET, positron emission tomography, SPECT, single photon emission tomography, even ultrasound that's been used in not only in humans, in various different, primates. And we know exactly what part of the brain is not really doing its job in the case of depression, or in the case of OCD or anxiety or PTSD. And there is a plenty of research work, that's been done. That so there is a pretty good idea of what part of the brain is not working, but the part is not exactly the same location. In, let's say, if you have two patients with diagnosed with depression, the part of the brain that's dysfunctional might not. I mean, dysfunctional is not a good word, which is not doing its job exactly
Mm-hmm.
right. Might not be in the same location. That's why imaging becomes so crucial. You have to be able to image, because the target for between two different patients could be slightly different, and the way that the target is calculated and computed and fed into the computer, and the computer guides the site of the delivery of the treatment becomes extremely crucial in the consistency of delivering energy and fine tuning the same
But
region.
if you change somebody who is like autistic, are you changing the personality actually?
Well, personality is a very, vague word that really doesn't have any scientific counterpart. Your
Okay.
personality is made of your values, right? Your perspective to life.
I really don't know. I don't have much of a personality.
I mean,
Well, maybe we
I'm
can
everybody
get
just
you
does.
one.
You might not.
Yeah.
You might not be able to name it or put a name on it, but
No, I have too much personality actually.
right. So, there are things, whenever you decide something is good and something is bad, right? What is your reference frame that you call something good or something bad? Those things are very difficult to really put numbers on it or quantify it scientifically.
But let me
So
just
your
take,
person,
forget the
Annie has a
quantification. Like
question. Go
Faith's
ahead.
point is, somebody comes skipping out of your office a few times. Wouldn't the people in their network say, "Boy, Faith has a different personality. A cloud has been lifted, or she's not making the same verbal gaffes that she was before"?
so if you consider the state of happiness as a part of your personality,
Mm-hmm.
yes. I
Yes.
mean, let's say Faith was unhappy and isolates herself, and whenever she's in a party, she tends to stay away from the crowd, and she doesn't have her own bubbly character, fuzzy character that she used to have. All of that, if you
Mm-hmm.
put all of those things together and call that Faith's personality, then once that condition is taken away, once the brain is fine-tuned, and she finds a reason to be happy again. I mean, if you think about it, happiness is really a skill. There's no reason why we have to be happy all the time. I mean, that's why human beings find things to be happy about, right? And the things that makes you happy might not make me happy, or might not make Faith happy, right? And
Right.
then if you so we really go through life developing a certain criteria or certain pattern for things that makes us happy and makes us unhappy, right? So, and let's say after you go through the first 2 decades of your life and you develop that skill, the skills of being consistently happy or unhappy about a subject, let's say something happens and that something could be genetically caused. It could be the result of exposure to a trauma or an accident, or anything that could cause that, then you lose that ability to be happy. And then, every day you get up and you have nothing to be happy about. The person that used to be happy and excited about going to school, getting a degree, finding a partner in life, buying a new car, moving, to a new state, all of those things that makes, most of us happy. If suddenly you find yourself in a situation that none of those makes you happy again, you have to ask, was my ability to be happy a skill that I acquired throughout life and something happened and I lost it?
Right.
That's a legitimate question, right? And then, for a while you might ignore the fact that you cannot be happy anymore, as happy as you used to be. But, if life goes on, and you're unhappy for a week, a month, a year, then you might seek some help, right? Then you go to a doctor and
We understand, I think, that there's no norm for happiness, and somebody may move off their norm one way or the other. So would you recommend your therapy for somebody who is, to use your helpful but perhaps imperfect car analogy, isn't just running as well as they did before? It's not like you can hear the engine and, it's grinding, but you kind of intuitively know that something is missing in your life, something is not performing as well as it did for you. Would you recommend that those people who have sort of a general sense of malaise go for the treatment?
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to tell you I'm a physicist, and so I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not a neuroscientist.
Well, neither are we. So that
most...
way you have an audience that's at your level.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
what
I
do you
will tell
think?
you,
I mean,
I think yes, Addie. I think they would go.
I think this technique,
I
at
do
least,
too.
the fMRI technique, the part that really maps your brain function, that this is my personal estimate and my personal perspective for the next 10 years or 20 years.
Mhm.
I think that's going to become part of the standard tool for psychiatry, and because it has become standard tool for every other part of medicine, for cardiology
Right.
and for
Sure.
neurology, and
It's,
and for
it's the
everything
first
else.
thing you do is you take a scan.
That's right. You take a scan, and the scan will tell you, exactly what's your brain function, and how your brain function compares with what we call standard brain function, right? I mean, that has a lot of use for it. Let's say let's compare it with another life situation, another medical situation. Let's say you go to a doctor. All of us go to our general practitioner, our GP, every 6 months or every year. And starting from probably your third decade or the fourth decade of your life, your doctor start taking a blood test, and he's going to look for cholesterol. And if your cholesterol goes above, what does he compare your cholesterol level with? He compares it with the standard, right? With the
It's a
standard
Yeah.
range.
of,
Yeah.
exactly. And they tell you, oh, your cholesterol is above this standard, and we are going to put you on statins, right? Very, but in psychiatry, we haven't been doing that. There is no standard imaging counterpart. Of course, psychiatrists are trained to look at you and talk to you for half an hour, and they have a standard model of human behavior
Yeah,
in
45
their
minutes.
head, and then compare you with the model, with the behavioral model in their head, and then they render a diagnosis and then the treatment and so on. Now this is going to be a powerful tool in the hands of psychiatrists, who will be using a second criteria. A psychiatrist now is going to have the same luxury as a cardiologist does, and all the other doctors
Yeah,
do.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you got FDA approval for one thing, two
Well,
things?
FDA has approved transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. TMS is the magnetic pulses, is the treatment part, right? So that is FDA approved for 3 disorders: for depression, for OCD, and I believe for anxiety. And I can imagine that it would be a matter of time before it's approved for other psychiatric disorders, as more data becomes available about the efficacy of TMS. Now this clinic actually combines 2 techniques: one, the imaging and target calculation and functional mapping of the brain, and then using that through an automated system, combining it with the power of TMS. So that's why the technology is called fMRI guided TMS.
So you're saying that eventually, when the sort of the acceptance curve goes up and the price goes down, and they meet somewhere, this would be a frontline diagnostic protocol. If a GP thinks that it won't be, I mean, maybe eventually it'll be used like a blood test, everybody will get it, but at some point it'll be more used selectively when there are enough evidentiary markers of depression that the scanning will rule out or rule in the situation.
Yeah, as more data is collected, by groups like this clinic and probably other and there are other people who are doing research in this area. They are not making it available in a clinical setting, but there are other
Yeah.
groups around the world and in the United States, in Canada, and Europe who are doing research in this area. And as more and more data becomes available on the efficacy of TMS, and especially when TMS is combined with the fMRI guided. Here, I have to tell you something that probably might cause some confusion if you don't clarify it here. TMS has been available for more than 20 years now.
Yeah.
And but what that, I'm going to refer to that TMS, the TMS that has been available heretofore, as standard TMS. That standard TMS, probably there are hundreds and hundreds of clinics that offer standard TMS.
Yeah,
right?
no, we know.
Yeah, that standard TMS, is unable to deliver target, with the accuracy that fMRI guided TMS does. With the fMRI guided TMS, you really take a picture of your brain activity and let that find the areas of malfunctioning, the malfunctioning parts of the brain, and then deliver the TMS to those sites. So that the fMRI guidance is the powerful aspect of.
That's why you need to be a physicist and neurobiologist and need to understand the spatial dimensions of the brain to accurately do the laser targeting on the exact area that needs the help.
Yes.
What do you think about where psilocybin fits in? So if you were putting somebody under an fMRI and they took some either psilocybin, a mushroom, or ketamine, would the same part of the brain light up that you're targeting?
You can ask the same question about any psychiatric drugs, right? The current state of medicine is such that when you take a Tylenol, right? You have a headache and you take Tylenol, right? Do you think that entire Tylenol goes to your head or goes to the body parts that they're not aching?
Right.
Right? This is called untargeted medicine.
Yeah,
right?
It's a broad brush. I get it.
Imagine if we develop a Tylenol, if Johnson & Johnson develops a Tylenol that when you take it, that entire medicine goes to the site that is aching, right? That is targeted medicine, right? So targeted medicine is kind of like surgery. Surgery they don't cut all your body, right? They only cut the part of the body that they need to do a procedure in, right? So this is really a bloodless, non-invasive surgery, unlike medication, which is untargeted and whole body treatment, right? Whether you're talking about ketamine or psilocybin or all the other medications that's used in psychiatry, they're effective in the site because they're designed by multi-billion-dollar corporations for the particular physiology of that disorder, but they have side effects on the parts that are not needed. And then nevertheless, they're going to make the same changes in the site that are not needed as they do in the sites that are needed. So that's why our entire medicine is really moving towards targeted therapy. To only treat the parts. Surgery, plastic surgery, neurosurgery, and all the other surgeries are really targeted therapy. They only deal with the...
If you are treating somebody for depression and you're hyper-targeted, like you say, and you have the effect on dopamine that an SSRI would, right? Is that measurable in blood in a PK level, or is there any other empirical validation that something is happening beyond how somebody feels?
You hit the nail on the head. The drugs, in order to really measure the efficacy of the drug without imaging, you really have only one criteria, and that is the way that the patient reports to the doctor, right? In the first session, the patient describes the way they feel and what they complain about. And then after treatment, after a course of medication or psychotherapy or whatever, that the psychiatrist does for the patient, then the psychiatrist has to evaluate the patient, and that evaluation involves a lot of reporting by the patient himself, and that makes it very subjective. So that's why it's really time for psychiatry to join the
And you have the placebo effect, which could be even in other drugs, could be as much as a third.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in this clinic, what they do, when a patient comes in, the patient goes to MRI, and MRI is taken of the patient. The MRI is sent to them. They do all the analysis on the MRI. Then they build the functional map. Then the patient comes in, and then they have an hour conversation with the patient where there is all data. They show the map of the brain. Here is the part, they might find out of so many different brain regions, they might find 3 or 4 regions that are not doing their jobs. And they're going to show the patient in the first session. And then after the course of treatment, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, they're going to do the same thing again. And then they're going to put those images, those functional maps side by side. They say, this was the brain you brought us before the treatment, and this is your brain today.
And if you don't keep going, it's sort of like a drug pusher in a way, not to be offensive, but if you don't keep going back, you're going to revert to the norm, and you'll end up without the skip.
Well, if it's just like saying that, if somebody breaks his leg, right, for whatever reason in basketball, falling off the steps, goes to a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon. Surgeon does his job, does the surgery, put a rod in the bone, and then puts a cast around the leg and asks the patient 2 things. He's going to ask the patient not to walk on that leg for 3 months, come back in 3 months. After they remove the cast, he's going to say, now there's things that you have to do, which means go to physical therapy to learn to walk again, right?
Right.
So if the patient, so the surgery does its job, but if the patient doesn't do what the surgeon recommends, not to walk on this leg for 3 months and then go to physical therapy for 4 months afterwards, right? In other words, if he goes back to the same condition that caused the disease, obviously he will face the same consequence.
So you're saying in your case, this with the guided protocol, it's the same thing. Unless the patient cooperates and changes behavior and collaborates with you, they're not going to have a long-term benefit.
We have different degree of cooperation, and the degree of cooperation really is a function of your conviction in the science part of the treatment, right? So when we ask patients to, for instance, I've heard them saying that they ask patients, for instance, to give up the habits that make you prone to anxiety, right? Like, if you have a cell phone and you're checking your cell phone every 30 seconds, you have to try to use less of that. If you have no habit of, reading books, you should start habit of reading books, the thing that bring you more comfort, more happiness, more detachment from the sources of anxiety, just like the basketball player that, that breaks his leg. So if you listen to the advices of the doctor that is treating you, in spite of the efficacy of the treatment, the post-treatment follow up with the recommendations, I think it goes a long way.
So the holistic lifestyle changes you make will amplify the effectiveness and the duration of the treatment.
Yes. So there are patients who after treatment they never see them again. And there are patients who come back after 2 years, or there are patients who come back after 6 months.
But I think from what I've learned about some of your patients, that even if they leave, like one patient was paralyzed, am I getting this right, on one side? And through this, he got some more mobility?
Yes.
And he stopped. I don't know if he ran out of money or...
But the patient...
he kept that, right?
When there is an assault on your brain, whether it's a stroke or head injury or whatever, or a brain tumor, your brain has a capability called plasticity, which means after the tumor is removed, or after the blood is drained, or after the skull is put together, and after a certain period of recovery after the accident, the brain is aware and cognizant of its loss of function. The brain knows that there was a the
Something's
brain
wrong.
region
Yeah.
that is not there anymore, or is
Right.
there and it's not doing its job, and other brain regions try to pick up the responsibility and do it. So it's a very long process.
But
So
it's
that's
for
why
years. Is it true that now we believe that there are degrees of neuroplasticity that for a long time neurologists didn't think was possible? We're seeing the brain is capable of regenerative healing more effectively than before.
So, there is this relationship between brain, which is the seat of our mind, right? So, your mind is really the emergent property of your brain, and your behavior is the emergent property of your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there is a relationship between brain, mind, and behavior. And this relationship is not a one-way relationship. It's a two-way relationship. The same way that if there is a change in your brain, for instance, aging and loss of tissue and brain atrophy or neurodegeneration or anything like that, right? If you lose physical structure in your brain, it will affect your mind and it will affect your behavior. The same thing is true. If you change your behavior, that change will affect your mind, and that behavior, the change in mind means the change of function of your brain, right? So you're forcing the change in the function of your brain through a change in your behavior, which is a very powerful thing. So meditation and indoctrination, psychotherapy, and all of this is really the result of that reverse direction, going
So
from
that's the theory of
behavior.
CBT. That's CBT in a way, that you can actually repattern yourself through
Right.
intentionality.
That's right. That's right. Uh,
So I wanted to ask, just let me, how they're saying the biome, your gut
Gut microbiome.
by, yeah, influences your brain, your health, your thinking. Do you agree with that?
I mean, the effect of your what's happening in your gut. There is a lot of validity to that. There is a body of research that is coming out that shows that some of the hormones and the neurotransmitters that are really being used up in your brain, are a function of the physiological activity in your gut. And we are just scratching the tip of that claim and that area of
Yeah.
research. And I'm sure that in the future we have a lot more to hear from that
The
from
gut
that
brain
area of
axis. Yeah,
research.
it's quite
I
fascinating.
think, what is the youngest patient you've ever had?
I'm not sure. I have to ask them. Probably 5, I would
5.
say. Yeah.
And what did that 5-year-old want to?
Most of the time when they're that young, they have autism.
Oh, and you've had success with autism?
Um, I mean, I think they had only 2 or 3 autistic patients, and yes, they had very good success. The older ones, I think the patients who were like 12, 13, 14 years old, they came more consistently. The younger patient I think, was coming from out of state,
Yeah.
and they only came for a week, and they didn't go back. But
But
the patient,
the earlier the better, though.
the earlier the better. Yes, the earlier the better. But I have to admit that this technique is very difficult to tolerate for a young, for 5-year-old, 6-year-old, seven-year
Because they
olds.
can't sit that long,
That's
or?
right. They can't sit that long, and this the magnetic pulse creates a sensation in your skin that feels like a woodpecker is picking on your skull, and then
Oh,
young children have very low tolerance for that. So so the logistics and really the way that the parents have to cooperate with them to be able to
yeah.
help the kid to tolerate and not be scared of the setting, all
Yeah,
of
no,
that.
there's a
That's
lot to
yeah.
overcome. But doctor, have you had this done?
No.
Why? 'Cause you don't need it?
I might need it.
We're in marketing. The minute somebody doesn't eat the product, then we wonder.
Yeah.
Well, remember, I am a physicist, so I work on the imaging part of it, right? On the imaging part, I have to tell you that I've been involved in development of some very, how shall I put it, exotic imaging technique, very extreme. At the time, 20, 25 years ago, it was called unsafe imaging technique, because
Mm,
we developed a very high power MRI scanner, the most powerful MRI scanner in the world. And and in that area, yes,
No,
we
yeah, they said it could give you cancer, destroy your brain,
that's
everything.
right. So we were the guinea pigs.
Let me just build on that for a second. Do you consider yourself somebody who is fighting for recognition, that you're still pushing up against the mandarins of medicine who are slow to adopt new technologies, and you have resistance, or do you feel you're breaking through that?
I don't think we have resistance. I think obviously, there is the body of work. If you think about how doctors are trained in this country or anywhere in the world, right? They go through their medical education, 4 years of medical school, and during that time they are taught certain things, right? And then they go do the residency and then the fellowship. If the technology isn't taught to them in medical school or
Right,
residency or fellowship,
right.
then they go on with establishing their own private practice and they're happily ever after.
No, there was just in the New York Times magazine section how doctors are not taught about menopause.
Right.
And most of them just get through medical
Well,
school. They don't know
for
anything.
years, I think there was one class for 2 days in nutrition, that which has
Yeah, that
changed.
too. That too. Good point. So,
But most doctors, they have to do their renewal of their licensing, and through that renewal requirement, that's every 10 years or so, they get familiar and they get exposed to the new technology. And vast majority of doctors, psychiatrists included, they, because of the extent of the rigorous education that they receive in medical school, they continue being interested in new technology, especially if that new technology brings a lot of relief to their patients. So if you go to a doctor's office, you see that they have scientific journals on their
Yeah, we
on
know.
the
Faith knows. We have a
cover.
son who's a neurosurgeon, so
Right.
yeah.
I didn't have a medical education, but I paid for it.
But you could pass the medical board, I'm
No,
sure.
let me ask. A lot of what you were talking about reminds me of conversations I've had with people who are big supporters of hyperbaric delivery of oxygen, in
Mhm.
terms of its ability to heal the brain, reduce inflammation, which I think you're talking about too, create new pathways, treat PTSD, and so forth. What's your view of that? And is there some adjuvancy benefit from hyperbaric plus urotherapy?
Well, I don't think I am qualified to compare hyperbaric with TMS or even with fMRI guided TMS, but I can tell you that oxygen is your brain uses a lot of oxygen, right? Your brain uses your brain weight constitutes 5% of your body weight, but it uses 25% of energy.
Wow.
And most of that energy, so it uses 5 times more than its share of
Right.
oxygen
Got
compared
it.
to the rest
Yeah.
of your body.
Yeah.
So the oxygen consumption is very, very intensive in the human brain. So if the brain uses oxygen so intensely, right,
Yeah.
then you can think about the fact that if you have oxygen deprivation for whatever reason, right, delivering more oxygen to the brain cannot be harmful, right? It's definitely helpful for the functioning of the brain, for lubricating, for basically providing a brain which is oxygen deprived. Your brain, our brain has about 200 billion neurons at the time of birth, and then in the first 2 decades of your life you lose about half of that. So by the time you're 25, you only have 100 billion neurons, but that's plenty. But that 100 billion neurons, they have, these neurons are connected through some wires, and these wires are not continuous. We call them axons. They're pieces of wire that have some gaps between them, and these synapses, these gaps between the wires, really increases the number of synapses to about 1 trillion synapses, 1,000 billion, 1 million synapses, and a lot of computations are done in your brain, and each site, and these computations have to be delivered from one side of the brain to the other side of the brain, and all of this really, when they are integrated, all this computation, all the activity, and your brain's ability to integrate this activity is only then that you can make sense of the outside world. Your cognition, your emotions, and your sensations can really go back and forth between your internal mind and the outside world in a meaningful way that other people don't consider you to be abnormal.
So I want to ask a quick question about the different regions of the brain, which you talked about, and how I think you said essentially they don't act in isolation. Like the executive function may not be separate from the amygdala, let's say, or the limbic system. So when you in your modeling, then do you say, well, if we overstimulate the executive function, somebody's going to become overly rational and then we'll get more depressed. So we got to like lower that activity, but maybe they're too impulsive. So we got to lower the activity in the amygdala. How does all that fit together?
So remember, I told you that different brain regions are members of of networks.
Yeah, that was my
And these networks sometimes, have and these networks have regions that we call them nodes, and these nodes are connected to each other, and that's how they form a network. A network could have a node in your cortical region, or it could have a node in your thalamic regions, and amygdala is one of those regions of the thalamic regions of the brain, of the internal brain or second brain. And depending on what goes wrong in which part of the brain and what that part of the brain, which network it's a member of, if then the function of that network will be affected. And as I said, up until now, we couldn't really image
right.
brain region to the accuracy required to identify the nodes or those tiny regions that their activity could be so accurately and precisely depicted that could give us a confidence for pinpointing the abnormal region and then delivering a
I
targeted therapy
see.
to it.
So I think that you are being very modest and too careful about exploding this work, you know, to the world, because just talking to those few people in your waiting room, they consider you a miracle worker. Now, I'm not invested in your company. I'm just saying, full disclosure, nothing. I met you once, but I mean, maybe it's the way doctors and physicists are. They just very like take a long time, but I think we have to speed it up. And what are you missing? Money? I mean,
Well, I have to tell you that doctors in the office, I'm sure that in the future you will talk to the doctors in the office, are more excited about it than physicists are. Physicists
mm,
are more subdued, and the world that we deal with is more abstract.
yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely right. I think they're very excited about it. They have they find this work very gratifying. They've had some really earth shaking results with patients that they really changed the course of their lives. I was referring to those two young girls. Actually, they were sisters who had some autism, and they couldn't go to normal schools, public schools or private schools, and they had to go to special schools. And within a year of treatment in their clinic, they um, uh, improved so much that they're back into normal schools, and they
Wow.
one of them finished
Remarkable.
school
Yeah.
with flying colors, and now is up to college, and the
It's a
parents are
great.
very
But could you see that Elon Musk's Neuralink could zap you from the inside and make some of these things happen?
well. Elon Musk can zap you from inside your pocket and inside your brain in ways that none of us can.
No, but he wants to put a little thing in your brain to
Well, I'm
maybe.
sure obviously he's doing all of his work with the work he does with Tesla. He does it with a lot of engineers, and the work he's going to be doing with the brain, he's going to be doing it with a lot of neuroscientists and psychologists and psychiatrists, and he knows that he wouldn't be able to put anything in any human brain before it gets approved, the safety, the working, and
Oh,
its
I don't think that would
predictability. And
stop him for a
Yeah.
minute. And I'll tell you another thing that I don't like. Just not another thing. The first thing is that he's not nice to his monkeys, his apes, whatever he's doing, his chimpanzees, they're not good in that lab. And I think that, I don't know, that bothers me. Like if you make a mistake in an experiment, you're really trying to do good. And like maybe there's a mistake. But when you use, I think they aren't human, but if you use like a life form to advance your work and then you don't, you have no gratitude, don't take care of it, I think that's bad. Anyway,
Well,
just my little speech.
the tradition of research with human subjects in this country,
Mhm.
at least now, I don't want to make comments about the past, but today it's very rigorous and stringent. If you want to run study that involves human subjects, you have to get a permission called Investigational Review Board, IRB, from
But what
whatever
about what
institute.
about wait a minute? What about chimpanzees? Aren't they
The same
human?
thing. The same thing is true about animal use. You have to have an animal protocol. You have to
I don't think
submit.
he did
uh,
that.
at least in academia, where I have been working, for the last 35 years, it's like that. Even if you want to study animals, you have
Yeah.
to first submit exactly a proposal about exactly what you want to do and for what purpose and what outcome is going to be.
And what
And
about the pain it causes? And
there is a
suppose you're done. That's
there is a
included.
part of
Okay,
it,
good.
big part of it has to do with the inconvenience and discomfort and in unnecessary
Okay,
pain
I
injuries.
don't think
All
he's listening to that, so I don't think Neuralink
No,
is
he'd
going to
never
work.
follow the rules. Why would he start with the
No, in a
IRB?
bad way. But anyway, I think I loved Neuralink till I heard about that. But I thought it was very interesting. I just want to say, I think you have to be. I'm sure you want advice from me. I think you have to be more. I don't know. You're so modest and so humble and so adorable. But I
Thank
think
you.
you have to get the message
No, I
out.
think the
He's
message needs awareness and
Yeah.
it needs a
You
culture
agree?
carrier.
Yes. But you haven't met his wife. His wife is gorgeous, dynamo, right?
Yes, she
She's
is.
she's an extrovert.
And she will be more proud of her technology than I am proud of my technology.
So,
We didn't talk costs. Can we just close by giving our listeners a
sure.
sense of how deep they have to dig to be transformed?
So it's just like asking a cardiologist, how much would it cost me to solve my high cholesterol problem, right? So he's going to say, let me first make sure you have high cholesterol before we talk about the cost, right? And first they run the test, a blood test, and that blood test will cost you. So the cost for this, unlike the cost for your cardiologist, is not covered by insurance.
We figured
And
that. Yeah.
Which
and
is
then
terrible.
so the imaging part, that they have a charge for imaging, and they charge you for imaging, the MRI part and the computation and all of that. And then after you come and they present the functional map and their diagnosis and the proposed treatment course, then you basically have the choice of stopping there and saying, okay, now I know what's wrong with me, I just wanted to have this for my records, and move on. Or you can decide that I want to go through with the course of
Right.
the treatment.
Isn't
So
it
the
six? Can I just tell Adam what he wants to know? I think, tell me if I'm wrong. You can yell at me. It's $6,000 a,
Zap.
what, a month, a treatment or what?
there are different courses of treatment. There are people who need only 20 sessions, which means 20 days.
But how much is each session?
Each
Six?
session is 600, not
600.
not
600.
Okay.
Okay.
6,000.
Not
Yeah,
6,000.
yeah,
Okay. That's not bad.
No.
yeah.
And
That's
it's
like one and a half shrink
right. And
sessions.
if a physician writes a script that says I need this, insurance will never cover it. At least the base level of imaging.
Well, remember, for those three conditions that I told you, they're FDA approved.
Right.
For those three conditions, most patients who have insurance, they pay for the treatment, they pay them for the treatment, and then they get a bill, and then they submit that bill to the insurance. And the insurance for those three conditions, most of their patients have one of those three conditions.
I got it.
They usually get reimbursed
And
for that.
are there pending applications for, let's say, Parkinson's with the FDA?
I can imagine that people with TMS, they have pending application for every disorder,
Right.
and for neurological disorders as well as psychiatric disorders. Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, ALS,
Right.
Parkinson's, and so on and so forth. At least the consequences of those brain disorders, those neurological disorders that have psychiatric repercussions, can definitely be treated the same way as psychiatric
Well,
disorders.
pretty much all. I mean, Parkinson's has depression and cognitive decline associated with it. Lewy body syndrome has the same thing.
Alayar, thank you
Yes.
so much.
You're welcome.
I just hung around that waiting room and I was just talking to everybody, and then I met you and I was very, very impressed. And I told everybody I knew they have to meet you, because I think you're on, really not on the brink of something. I think you're doing something, and that we have to make sure more people know about and come to you. And what do you think, Addie?
Yeah, I
Addie's
agree.
more-
I think that there's no doubt that the more we know and can look into and trigger the brain, the healthier people can become. And it's sort of lagged behind other areas of medicine for obvious reasons. But yeah, I agree with
Obviously.
Faith. We're post the brink, I think, and now it's about adoption, awareness, and energy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, all those pills, those like big pill bug,
And
like,
side effects.
And side effects, like not only Concerta, but like what, all those pills, Lexapro, my favorite, all those pills. I mean, it would be like, boom, not that fast, because you like to say it's slow and slow, but they would be out of business. So you said you have no opposition, and I respectfully disagree with you. Once people understand this in New Jersey, you will have a lot of opposition.
Yeah, don't forget, they spend billions of dollars to get a drug approved, and they're looking for a long patent life. Anything that threatens that patent life is an existential risk to them.
Addie's right. Existential risk. Beautifully said.
Thank you very much for the
Yes.
opportunity,
Okay.
and I enjoyed talking to both of you.
Thank
We
you,
loved
Alayar.
you.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Addie, what do you think?
I'm ready to go. I mean, I think that the risk is low, the experience is high. Even if it doesn't work, we'll have a lot to talk about. So when are we making our appointment?
Well, we can go anytime. I think we'll get preferential treatment, seeing this so expensive. I think we can go anytime. I mean, I wasn't kidding. I talked to people in that waiting room. You know how it is, saying like, "Does this work? Could this be?" And the stories were amazing. I mean, he didn't want to talk a lot about this guy that got feeling back in his paralysis, because then he ran out of money. And that's what I think that this thing is missing, like some kind of foundation that would, support it. They're still like very poor.
People will have to start GoFundMe campaigns.
Exactly.
But the guy who lost feeling in his arm had just enough feeling to reach for his credit card.
Yeah, exactly. You're so funny.
No, I think I love this kind of experimental innovation, and I do think that it's the future. It's precision medicine at its most exacting.
It is. Now I'm worried about my Tylenol going to other places. It's very scary. Well, where's it going?
It goes everywhere.
To my liver. Oh my God. Anyway,
It does.
I know. With the martinis.
I wonder if they ask you how much alcohol you've consumed before you go under the fMRI. And then they have to really juice it up depending upon your consumption of vodka tonics.
I loved your question about, Special K and what's the other one?
Psilocybin.
Yes, psilocybin. They don't know a lot about that, but the psilocybin people are swearing it's a depressive antidote.
Yeah, we had somebody on back a year or so ago. And the other thing is that psilocybin is a recreational drug. So in addition to giving you depression relief, here you don't feel anything other than the very narrow areas of the brain he's targeting.
Yeah, I know. It's not that much fun.
No, it's not fun.
No, but you can get well.
But maybe it helps you find fun.
Yeah, I loved how he talked about what personality is and what, that was interesting. What being happy is.
Right.
A lot of people are thinking about that. Anyway, sweetheart, I will talk to you soon.
All right,
and
take care.
So cool.
Thank you for bringing him on and for hanging out in his waiting room.
Yeah.
The before Faith and I go, I just want to remind you to subscribe to Jolty, follow us, listen on your podcast platform of choice, tell your friends, make your enemies like you better, and get Jolty out into the world. We thank you.
Yeah, beam us up, babies. Ciao.
Beam us up, keep us up.